Good afternoon. On behalf of the Evergreen Communities Outreach Committee, I'd like to welcome you to day 3 of the Evergreen International Conference and the fourth session of the day. We'd like to thank Mobius for sponsoring track 1 today and Equinox Open Library Initiative for sponsoring the closed captioning for the conference. If you are not familiar with Zoom's webinar controls, please take a moment to acquaint yourself with them. Feel free to use the Q&A or chat for questions, or use the raise hand button to be called on to speak. The chat is also a good place to make comments and interact with other attendees. Please make sure that you have the to drop-down set to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, you'll just be messaging the panelists. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the Evergreen Project's YouTube channel after the conference. And without further, also I want to thank Karen, our great captioner. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Thompson from Noble, north of Boston Library Exchange, who is going to talk about batches, baskets, buckets, and book bags. Take it away.
Thank you, and I'm going to share my screen. And I think I'll turn off my face here. Okay. Okay, so this is batches, baskets, buckets, and book bags. Debbie said it better than I do. And what we're talking about, excuse me, my face just came back. What we're talking about are different ways to do something with a group of items or a group of bibliographic records. So for items, we have two options: a batch, which is not really a container, it's a temporary group of items that you pull together for a particular task, and that group goes away when you close down the browser, when you're finished with your session. And item buckets, which is a persistent group of items, a persistent container of items that stays on the system until you delete it. And then for bibliographic records, there is a basket, which is a temporary group of items, and that group goes away when you clear the basket or end the session. Record buckets, which is a container, a permanent, persistent group of bib records that stay on the system until you delete them. And then a book bag, also known as my lists, which is really the patron version of record buckets. So we're going to look at all those different options. So batches are groups of items that are brought together in the item status screen, which is also called search for items by barcode on the search menu. And those items can be scanned or uploaded from a file or a combination of the two. A file of barcodes can come from scanning items into a text file or from a report. And working with a batch is useful for many different types of projects, including inventory, data cleanup, special projects. For us, it's often a project where somebody is pulling science fiction out of fiction into a section of its own, or they're taking the old section of science fiction and reintegrating it into the fiction collection. But there are all sorts of projects that can use batches. And again, they're not persistent. They live in the moment and they go away when you end that session. So this is the item status screen. We have a box where we can scan items. Whoops. We have a box where we can scan items, and we also have a choose file option where we can upload a text file of barcodes. And that's what I've done here. But either way, you have the same result. You have a screen that lists items and check boxes to select one or more items or all items, and then do something to them. The option to sort by the column heading is often helpful in helping you find a batch within a batch. So in this particular file, there were adult things and children's things, and then there were things in different statuses. So I sorted this by the item status field because I wanted to do something with the ones that are currently checked out. So I selected the ones that were currently checked out, and that's why they're highlighted. You can select items by clicking in the boxes in the left column, but you have to do that one at a time. But you can also select a range by clicking in the row itself. So I clicked in the row of the first one that I have selected, held down the shift key, and then clicked in the row for the last one of the checked out items. And that was easier than checking in all the individual boxes. So now that I have some selected, I have an actions menu, and I have all kinds of actions here. I can edit and delete things and update inventory date and print labels and do all sorts of things. In fact, what you see on the screen is really only the first section of actions. So this is really all one long drop down. So you can see that you can do everything from check things in or request them or view the originating acquisition for them, delete the items, mark them as damaged or discarded, discard weed, or mark them missing, or edit the call numbers, or there's just so many different actions. And looking at this list, you can think of all of the different kinds of projects where some aspect of them might be bring things together in item status and then do whatever needs to be done to them. That's why I call item status the Swiss Army knife of the Evergreen system. I'm not going to show you all those different actions. They all work exactly the way you would expect to. So if you clicked on print labels, it would open the label interface. If you clicked on update inventory date, you get a message saying, okay, I updated the inventory date. This is the edit items one. I just want to show you this one because I think it's a nicely designed screen for a batch process. So I selected these items. They all have the same status. So it's telling us the current status is, current status is checked out. They all have the circ modifier book. But when it comes to shelving location, the items in that batch came from different shelving locations. So it just says multiple locations, and then I can click on that to see where those came from. And the same is true over with the price. It's not filling in a price as being the current value because there are multiple prices, and I could see what those are if I link in that. But assuming I do want to change all of these, I can either make the changes on this screen or apply a template to change them all as a batch. Although this isn't really a reporting function, the item status, you do have a couple of options to get data from it. There's a print button at the bottom of the screen. This is basically a receipt. In this case, it's not terribly useful. It just has the title and the barcode. But it is a receipt template that you could edit if you wanted to get more information because this was useful to you in some way. But the real power comes from print full grid, or even more so from download full CSV file. And the good thing about these are that they follow whatever you have configured on the grid. So if you're going to open the file in Excel, you want to turn on every column that's going to be useful to you. And usually when we're trying to configure the grid, we don't want to have a whole lot of columns turned on because they get too narrow to actually be very useful. But knowing that that data is going to go to Excel might make you want to turn on some columns there that you don't normally see. So you configure whatever columns you want to have in your report. You click on download full CSV, and it gives you a CSV file that you can open in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever for advanced formatting as a list for a particular project, or to do some analysis of whatever you might want to do analysis of. You can do it there. But it always follows what's currently configured in the grid in terms of the sort order and what columns are going to be on your spreadsheet. But Sometimes a batch just isn't enough, and that's when you need item buckets. If you're working on a project that you can do in one sitting, then working with a batch is just fine. But if you're working on a project that's going to persist over several days, you're going to be gathering different items that are going to fall into a particular category where you're going to want to reclassify them in some way or do something else with them. Or you're working on something like um, uh, Black History Month and you want to be pulling items from many different sections of the collection over a period of a week or more before you then go put everything on display, then you're better off using an item bucket. And the way to get things into an item bucket is if you've already scanned them and you have them in item status, add to an item bucket is the first action on that action menu. So often you start by doing the scanning and then you put the things into a bucket. And those item buckets will remain on the system associated with your login until you delete them, unless your local system has some other policy for how long you can keep them. The other good thing about being able to keep them is for a project like Black History Month or summer reading, you can leave them on the system for a year, change things so they're no longer a display status or whatever. And then next year, you don't have to start from scratch. You'll already have a batch of things in your bucket. You can add new things. You can remove things that are obsolete or have been deleted or whatever, but it can be a good head start for repeating a project seasonally or annually. So in this case, I'm on the item status screen. I selected all of my items and I chose the action add to item bucket. And this is what I see. It will give me a drop down of existing buckets. So it knows how I'm logged in. It'll give me a drop down of all of my buckets so I can add these new items to that bucket. Or I can start a new bucket here. And that's what I'm doing. I'm calling the name I'm giving my new bucket is send to storage. This may be a project where I'm selecting things that haven't circulated for a long time, and I need to pass this report on ultimately to somebody else to make the decision about whether to send these to storage. And, sorry. You can also go directly to item buckets. You don't have to go through item status. As you can see, it's called search for items by barcode in the search menu. It's also in the circulation menu. It's in the cataloging menu. And it's also on this main page, portal page as well. It's all over the place because it is often the crossroads between circulation and tech services and collection management used by lots of different people in different positions and roles. This is the item bucket interface. So when we come here, it's telling us we don't currently have a bucket selected. We've got that drop down where we can do a new bucket. We can edit a current bucket if we had one open already. We can delete the current bucket, and we can also open a shared bucket. And then below that line, you can see the list of, or the start of the list of the buckets I already own. So I own one called Children's Relocation Project and one called Harry Potter, and that's a long drop down. So here's where I can go select my bucket or start a new one. And when you create a bucket, or in this case, I'm editing a bucket has a name. So this is my board book reorganization project, and it has a description. It's a really good idea to add something to those descriptions, especially if the project is going to persist over time or this bucket's going to be used a year later. It's very helpful to remind yourself of why you put these in there and what its purpose was. And then there's that checkbox that says publicly visible. It's And I don't think this is actually working yet. It has nothing to do at the moment, at least with being publicly visible. It's supposed to control sharing, but at least on my system, and this is uh, our training system, it's on 3.4. I am not finding it that way. I'm finding that all buckets can be opened by number and that anyone can um, add or remove items from the bucket. Um, to share a bucket, so this is my bucket and it's number 33. I can say to a colleague, I put together that list that you wanted. If you want to see it, it's in bucket 33, and then they will be able to open it by number. I see something in the chat. Um, I don't know because it's yeah, I know what it's supposed to do in terms of sharing permissions, but I'm not entirely sure of how it's actually working. And now I'm lost. Okay. In addition to adding things to a bucket from item status, you can also, anytime you're on an item view, so you're looking at an item, one of the actions will be, usually the top action will be add to a bucket. So you can always just be looking at any item or open a full item and decide you want to put that in a bucket. That's often done in cataloging when you see things that you want to give some further attention to. You can put them in a bucket and then deal with them all later. When you're looking at a bucket, you have the same kinds of options that you have in a batch in item status. You can select some or all of them, and you can sort by column headings and so on. And then you have actions, but you see, you don't have nearly as many actions. I'm sorry, I'm using a very, very sensitive touchpad here. You see that you don't have nearly as many actions as you have in item status, and you can't directly open them in item status. There's actually a launchpad bug on this, and the code is there just waiting to be committed, which will be great. Pending. You see in the bucket area here, we have the bucket view, and then we have another tab that's an area called pending. And pending is not another bucket. It's like a little, it's almost like a clipboard or a place where you can temporarily stick a batch of items to move them from one bucket to another. And it's also how you split a bucket or how you merge buckets or whatever. So right now I'm looking at my bucket that was Ocean Month display, and it has 50 items in it. And I selected the items in that belong to the children's department. And what I can do with them is use the option to move selected items to pending. And when I do that, those are now over there, those 18 are over there. I can set up a new bucket, which I've already done here, called Ocean Children's Titles. And so now that I have these selected, I can use the bucket action to put those into my new children's bucket. So that's how I was able to split one that had both children's and adult things into two separate. It's also how you can go merge things by opening one bucket, putting the items in pending, opening the other bucket, and then dumping the items from pending into the new bucket that's going to be the merged. So you have to kind of fool around with the logic of it a little bit, but you do have the option to do splitting and merging and so on. So those two things that we were discussing both had to do with item records. And now we're crossing over to the world of bibliographic records. And one of the options, fairly new, is baskets. And a basket is a temporary group of bib records. And they've got various purposes. So in the public catalog, the basket for patrons replaces temporary lists. So it lets the patron choose a group of things and then turn that into a new or existing My List. And in both the public and staff catalogs, baskets can be used to place multiple holds on a group of items, excuse me, a group of titles. And in the staff catalog, baskets can be used to select titles, select a group of titles, and then move them into a bucket. And records stay in the baskets until they are cleared or the session ends. So I'm here and I am selecting a group of, I did a search on author Susan Orlean. I checked off the Orchid Thief. I have two other things already checked off. It's telling me here that I have at the top of the search results, it says 3 selected titles. So I know that I've got 3. The background for the Orchid Thief, you can see that it's checked off, and it also has that gray background as an easy way to distinguish records that are already in your basket versus records that you may be adding to your basket. So I can go over to the actions, the basket's actions, and choose place holds. I'm sorry, I'm in the staff client here. So for the place hold dialog, I have the thing that you always have, even when you're placing a single hold, which is it's asking, are you placing this for a patron? In which case, why don't you tell me their barcode? Or are you placing this for the actual staff login, which is probably less common. So it's showing me the 3 books that I wanted to place a hold for my patron, place on hold for my patron. And I only have to answer the questions of the pickup location and the notification and all of that once. I can click yes to suspend these holds and give it an activation date. I also have the option to clear the basket after the holds are requested. Personally, I kind of wish that that were on by default. The real issue here is the patron, are you done with this patron, or after you place holds, are they going to want you to print a list of them or do something else? If you're done with this patron and you have reason to believe they're on their way out the door, you really want to make sure you clear that basket so that basket doesn't end up being an active basket and you choose some other things for another patron and now you're adding holds that new patron didn't want. So the answer to that should almost always be yes, I want to clear that basket, unless the first patron is hanging around to do more with you. The basket persists through the session or until cleared. You can also, I keep showing them as being something that you access through search results, but you can also be on a particular bib record. So I'm on the record here for American Fire, and I have the option over in the toolbox where print and mail and all of that is. I can add this to the basket individually there. This lasts through multiple searches. So if I were doing a, putting together things for a book display on lions and tigers and bears, I could do a search on lions, choose a bunch of things, do a search on tigers, choose a bunch of things, do a search on bears, choose a bunch of things, think of some other thing and go directly to that record and put that in there. I can take things in and out of the basket. It's a shopping cart. So you find additional things and when you have the group of things that you want, then you can place a hold on them or in the staff client, you can also add them directly to a bucket. So to me, this is a great interface to the buckets. It's a great gathering place. It lets you do searches and look at the bibliographic information and so So it's a good thing to use for all sorts of displays or book lists or anything where you want to kind of search around through the catalog and hand select some things that you want to do something with in a bucket. And here's how I add my basket to my bucket. And I get that same dialogue asking me to, that I get with items to put it in an existing one or open a new one. This is just showing you that you can go directly to record buckets. I have it here on the portal page. It's also in the cataloging menu. When you go here, you have very similar to the item bucket interface. You have the option to create a new bucket, to edit one of the existing buckets, to delete one. For shared bucket, if I open that, it would ask me for a record bucket number, and I would give it that, and it would open that. And then you have create carousel from bucket, which is new and exciting. And then I have the start of a list of buckets that I already have on the system. I'm over here in the, where am I? Oh, again, you don't need to be working from that search interface and basket kind of interface. Anytime you're on a bib record, just like anytime you're on an item record, you have the option to add something to a bucket. This was always there. This was also in the Zool client. It's just easier to find now. So if I find a group, if I'm cataloging and I see a record like this and I see an error in it or something else I want to do, I can just put these things in a bucket that way. And looking at my buckets, I have the option to select a group of them, and then I have some actions for them. You have fewer actions for bibliographic records than you have for item records, but you do have certain ones. And one thing that, to my knowledge, you can only do through a record bucket is merge records. And I really kind of actually like this screen. So I think these two records are duplicates. I choose them and put them in a bucket. Sometimes we have 3 or 4 records that we think might be duplicates. And I can determine which is the lead record. I can edit that record a little bit and then merge the 2 records together using a merge profile if appropriate. So that's one of the uses for a bucket. The record query, this is a very cool thing in record buckets. You can search, I'm just going to go directly to it. You have an option over here called record query, and you can give a query, you can enter a query directly here and search your bibliographic database. So here I'm saying I want things that have the subject ocean, and I truncated it so that I'd get ocean, oceans, oceanography, oceanographer, or similar things. And so it's going to pull up for me all of the records that match that search that I did. And then I can throw them into a bucket. In this case, there is a limit on the size of query that it will do. I'm on our training server, and I believe it's set to the default, which is 1,000 records. We have it set to a higher number on our production server. But if you get to an even number and it stops, that's probably hit the limit. Back here on the queries that I can do, I can get all Boolean. I can also limit to things by library. Because we don't want to run into a limit, we almost always do this. So in the examples you can see for the same thing, I did subject, ocean, truncated, and site, Wakefield, all caps. And that means like I want all the ocean things, but only if Wakefield is attached to them. I love these queries because you can really get interesting information. The one on autism there, and we truncated it. We were really looking to see everything that was related in any way to autism in our collection, including electronic resources and fiction and nonfiction, anything that somewhere included that word, because we were interested in looking at the date ranges and whether some of that material was outdated and so on. So it was a really easy way to put together a whole group of things. And just showing off the Boolean stuff that you can do. I did subject Christmas, and then I used the quotes and the double pipe, which is the or, to say, I want something about Christmas and Netherlands, Dutch, or Holland. And you can use the double ampersand for and. So in this last one, I was looking for things with learning or reading, disabilities or differences or difficulties or dyslexia. So I had, it's just showing that if you're trying to analyze something from your collection, you can get really detailed. By the way, all of these queries would also work in the catalog, but I tend to mostly use them here. So once we have the records here, we can put them in a bucket, which we sometimes want to do, but we can also use the actions right on this record query screen to output them as a CSV file and take them into Excel to do something else with them. Oh, patrons. So patrons also have baskets. So I'm logged into a patron account here, and I'm doing a search, and I'm choosing some books about Greenland that I'm interested in reading, and I could go on and do other searches and so on. And when I'm ready, I have the option to place a hold on them. And so I can do that. By the way, patrons had the ability to place a hold on a batch of items before using the temporary list. It's just that they didn't always, there wasn't a way to put together a batch and then see an option that was called, place a hold. So the patron here is placing a hold on 3 titles. They're not going to be the first light one is an ebook, so that's not going to be eligible for a hold by Evergreen. When they place this hold, they do, like we did with in the staff client, they choose their pickup location and all of that just once. And then they will get back a list of the holds and which were successfully placed and which were not. So they will get that information if for whatever reason they can't place a hold on something. And again, I'm still in a patron account. I can also add my basket to a saved list. So I'm going to choose that. And it takes me here. So I'm in the My Lists interface in the public catalog. I can create my new list here. So I give it a name, I give it a list description. I can decide here whether I'm ready to share that list or I want to keep it private. And I can click on submit, and then it goes with my other saved lists. I also could have chosen one of my existing lists. And so here's what a patron's My List looks like when it's been made public. I mentioned opening, I mentioned that you could open a shared bucket using the bucket ID. This is, I don't know if this is intentional or a bug that somebody will turn off at some point. But when you look at a patron's My List, you can see in the URL something that says book bag ID or book bag. So that patron's list that they had decided to share, if I open that, I can get that number. And then I can go into the staff client and I can open that in the staff client. Don't ask me why it says load shared bucket by ID. But now I have that open here in a staff bucket. We actually have libraries that use this who have either super patrons, reading group leaders, that kind of thing, who are putting together lists using the My Lists function, but the staff can then go do something to do a display or do something else with them if they have that number. But you see, I've got my patron number here. This was my list, but it is open as a record bucket in the staff client. So in summary, we've got, for items, we've got batches, which are in the item status screen. They're just pulled together temporarily. And we've got item buckets, which are persistent, stay on the system until the bucket is deleted, and can be used for all kinds of editing, updating, changing data, updating, marking missing, all of those kinds of things. And then we have bibliographic records, which can be in a basket, which is a temporary group and goes away, a record bucket, which is a persistent group that stays on the system until it's deleted, and the book bag, also known as My Lists, which is the patron version of record buckets. And that's about it. Any questions?
Elizabeth, we had some questions in the chat earlier. Let me get back there. And so Diane Disbrow from Scenic Regional Library asks, what is in the list when you print it? Title, author, call number?
Oh, well, in which list?
I would say that was back.
Yes, when you're in a bucket.
The basket list, she says.
Oh, okay. When you're in the basket list, you get a not very useful list. It's the same list that you've always been able to get from any kind of group of records. But there is development that is part of it was a mass link development that then rolled over into an ECDI development that is in 3.5 maybe, which will give you much more control over the content of those, and have more information that patrons are actually looking for, and not just like the record number, but things like the local call number and so on. I will add that. I will add a note about that to the slide so that gets there. I should have done that. And yes, in merging records, you can manage to get a record that is better than either of those records by copying the group of fields off of one onto the other, so that you have one super record that combines the best of both of them. Where do you set the number of records returned in the record query? I asked Michelle and she does it. So it's a setting somewhere in the system. I think I will add that to the, I'll also add that to the slide. There is a setting that says that if you do a search and it results in one hit, that record opens. I, of course, don't remember where that setting is or what it's called. But I know there is one. Yeah, it's in library settings, which is, yeah, in my organization, I'm not a person who's allowed to change library settings. Okay, I think I'm done.
All right. Did you see? Oh no, never mind. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that was really interesting and helpful. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Oh, I meant to have my video on. So you can stick around. We're continuing to record all the way through. So if you want to continue interacting in the chat, please feel free to do so. We're going to have our next session. We'll start at 4 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Central, and 1 o'clock Pacific, right? Yeah. So we'll see you back then hopefully, or if you're going to the other track, please do log out of this one so that there is enough seats for the people that want to attend the next session. Thanks.